Have you ever noticed something strange about your mind? A friend doesn't reply for several hours. Immediately, your thoughts begin racing. Maybe they're angry. Maybe you said something wrong. Maybe something terrible happened. Within minutes, your brain has already written an entire disaster movie. What's fascinating is that nothing has actually happened. Reality hasn't changed. Only your imagination has. Yet your heart begins beating faster. Your stomach tightens. Your muscles tense. Your body reacts as though the imagined future is already real. Why? Because your brain has an unusual habit. It doesn't merely predict the future. It simulates possible futures. Every second, your brain is quietly asking one question. What happens next? Most of the time, this happens completely outside your awareness. You don't consciously decide to imagine danger. Your brain simply does it automatically. Long before you recognize a situation, millions of neurons have already begun constructing possibilities. Some are hopeful, some are neutral. But one category receives far more attention than the others: negative possibilities. Not because your brain enjoys suffering, but because evolution never rewarded optimism. Imagine standing near a river 100,000 years ago. You hear movement in the bushes. One person assumes it's probably the wind. Another imagines a predator. If the sound really is harmless, both survive. But if the sound hides danger, only the cautious person lives long enough to pass on their genes. Generation after generation, evolution quietly selected brains that noticed threats before opportunities. Not because they were happier, because they survived. The result is the brain sitting inside your skull today. Modern life looks completely different. Predators have mostly disappeared, yet your nervous system still treats uncertainty like potential danger. An unanswered email, a strange medical symptom, a difficult conversation, an upcoming interview. The brain responds to all of them using the same ancient prediction machinery. And here's the remarkable part. The brain rarely predicts the most likely future. Instead, it often predicts the future that would be most dangerous if ignored. This is called negativity bias. Your attention naturally sticks to bad news longer than good news. You remember criticism more vividly than compliments. One uncomfortable comment can erase an entire day filled with praise. Your mind isn't broken. It's following survival software written millions of years ago. But negativity bias alone doesn't explain something even stranger. Sometimes your brain doesn't merely expect problems. It invents catastrophes that have almost no chance of happening. Why would an intelligent brain do something so irrational? To understand that, we first need to understand how uncertainty feels inside the brain. To the brain, uncertainty is expensive. Not because uncertainty is painful by itself, but because uncertainty forces the brain to keep simulating possibilities. Imagine waiting for the results of an important medical test. Nothing has changed. Your body is exactly the same as it was yesterday, yet your mind refuses to stay still. What if it's cancer? What if they found something serious? What if my whole life changes tomorrow? Within minutes, your brain has generated dozens of futures, each one slightly different, each one demanding attention. This constant simulation consumes enormous mental energy, and the brain hates wasting energy, so it searches for the fastest way to stop the uncertainty. Ironically, the quickest solution isn't finding the truth. It's choosing a prediction, even if that prediction is terrible, because certainty feels easier than endless possibility. Psychologists call this catastrophizing, not simply expecting bad outcomes, but treating the worst possible outcome as the most believable one. Notice what happens during a sleepless night. One unanswered text becomes rejection. A headache becomes a brain tumor. One awkward meeting becomes unemployment. A single mistake becomes lifelong failure. The evidence barely changes. Only the prediction does. Yet once the prediction is accepted, your body responds as though it has become reality. Your heart races. Your breathing becomes shallow. Stress hormones flood your bloodstream. The fascinating part is that your body isn't reacting to reality. It's reacting to a prediction. Brain imaging studies have shown that vividly imagined threats can activate many of the same emotional circuits involved in responding to actual danger. To your nervous system, a convincing imagination can feel surprisingly real. This is where two parts of the brain begin competing: the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala is ancient. Its job is simple: detect possible danger. Respond immediately. Don't wait. Don't debate. Don't collect perfect evidence. just survive. The prefrontal cortex works very differently. It asks questions. It compares evidence. It calculates probabilities. It slows impulsive reactions. The problem is that under stress, the amygdala often speaks first, long before logic has finished its sentence. This explains why fear feels so convincing. Fear arrives instantly. Reason arrives later, sometimes much later. Evolution intentionally designed the system this way. If your ancestors paused to analyze every possible threat, they might not have survived long enough to finish thinking. Better to run first. Ask questions later. This ancient strategy still shapes modern life, except today's dangers are rarely lions hiding in tall grass. They're social, psychological, financial, emotional. Instead of running from predators, we run from embarrassment, from rejection, from imagined futures that exist nowhere except inside the predictive machinery of the brain. Here's something even stranger. The brain isn't actually trying to make you miserable. It's trying to prepare you. If it imagines the worst possible outcome, then perhaps you'll be ready if it happens. This unconscious strategy feels intelligent, but it comes with a hidden cost. Every catastrophe rehearsed inside your mind becomes another emotional experience. The brain doesn't completely separate real memories from repeatedly imagined ones. The more often you mentally rehearse disaster, the more familiar disaster begins to feel, and familiarity creates another illusion: probability. You begin thinking, I keep imagining it, so maybe it's likely. This is known as the availability heuristic. Events that are easier to imagine feel more probable than they actually are. The more vividly your brain constructs disaster, the more real it seems. The more real it seems, the more anxiety grows, and the more anxious you become, the more disasters your brain invents. Without realizing it, you've entered a self-reinforcing prediction loop. The frightening thought wasn't the end of the process. It became the beginning of the next one. So the real question isn't, how do I stop thinking negative thoughts? It's something much deeper. How do you teach a brain that evolved to predict danger, that not every uncertainty needs a catastrophe? The answer begins with a simple realization. Your thoughts are not predictions. They're predictions about predictions. Your brain isn't showing you the future. It's showing you its current best guess. And guesses can be wrong. This is one of the most important discoveries in modern neuroscience. The brain learns through something called prediction error. Every time reality differs from expectation, the brain receives new information. Imagine walking into a meeting expecting criticism. Your muscles tense. Your heart beats faster. Your brain prepares for conflict. But instead, your manager thanks you for your work. For a brief moment, something remarkable happens. Reality contradicts prediction. The brain has two choices: ignore the evidence or update the model. Every meaningful improvement in your life has followed this exact pattern. Perhaps you thought you could never speak in public. Then you survived your first presentation. Perhaps you believed everyone would reject you. Then someone accepted you exactly as you were. Perhaps you imagined failure so many times, only to discover that reality was far kinder than your imagination. Each experience quietly teaches the same lesson. The worst-case scenario wasn't inevitable. Little by little, the brain begins rewriting its internal map. This is how neuroplasticity works. Not through positive thinking, not through pretending everything will be fine, but through allowing reality to correct prediction. The goal isn't to force yourself to think positively. That simply replaces one prediction with another. Instead, the goal is to become more curious than certain. Notice how differently these two thoughts feel. This meeting will be a disaster, compared with, I don't know what will happen. The second statement doesn't promise success. It simply leaves room for reality. And reality is almost always more complicated than fear. Psychologists who study acceptance and commitment therapy describe a powerful skill called cognitive defusion. Instead of saying, this will happen, you learn to notice. I'm having the thought that this will happen. At first, the difference seems tiny, but neurologically, it changes everything. One sentence treats prediction as reality. The other recognizes prediction as mental activity. That small distance weakens fear's illusion of certainty. Because anxiety doesn't need negative thoughts. It needs unquestioned thoughts. The moment you begin observing your predictions instead of obeying them, the prediction loses some of its power. Curiosity quietly replaces certainty. Instead of asking, what if everything goes wrong? You begin asking, what evidence do I actually have? What else could happen? What am I assuming? These questions don't eliminate uncertainty. They transform your relationship with it. Ironically, the strongest minds aren't the ones that predict the future most accurately. They're the ones most willing to update their predictions. Scientists do this. Pilots do this. Doctors do this. Good leaders do this. They don't confuse confidence with certainty. They stay flexible, because reality keeps changing, and so must the model inside the mind. Perhaps this is what wisdom really is. Not knowing everything, but remaining teachable. Not eliminating fear, but refusing to mistake imagination for reality. Your brain will probably continue inventing worst-case scenarios. It evolved to do exactly that. The goal isn't to silence that ancient voice. It's to recognize it for what it is. An old survival system, trying to protect you using information from a world that no longer exists. The next time your mind whispers, what if everything falls apart? Pause for just a moment. Remember that your brain has been wrong before, many times. The catastrophe you're rehearsing may never arrive. The conversation you're fearing may become a friendship. The challenge you're avoiding may become your greatest source of growth. The future has always been larger than your imagination, and the most accurate mind will never be the one that predicts the darkest future. It will always be the one that never stops updating itself, because the opposite of anxiety isn't certainty, it's curiosity.